okay with, if you want to ask a question and you're okay with your voice being a part of that YouTube video, that's perfectly fine. If you're not, then I would just say use the chat, because again, I'm going to monitor that the whole time and it works really well. Okay, so the lectures. And I apologize if I'm speaking too fast. I tend to do that. So basically, the way that the lecture is going to work is every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 8 a.m., I'll have like a live stream, right? So during that live stream, I'm going to record the lecture for that day. The topics of that lecture are based off of what we finished in the previous lecture. So for example, today is lecture 1. In today's lecture, we're going to go through the course outline, and we're going to start lecture set 1. And by the end of that, wherever we leave off, that will determine where we start on Tuesday, which would then be lecture set, well, which would then be lecture 2. So it's just a successive process of recording and streaming the materials that we need throughout the semester. Now, the way that the university has scheduled it is they've said, okay, if you're in ASO 1, for example, your designated lecture time is Thursday at 8. And if you're in ASO 3, your designated lecture time is Tuesday at 8. Now, the other part of that scheduling, and this is true for both sections, is a asynchronous component, which essentially means that I am responsible to give you the materials you need to finish the week. So the way that I've been trying to break this down is essentially by saying you have 3 hours of material that you need to learn every week or get through, or whatever however you want to describe it. 1.5 or half of that 3 hours is that scheduled lecture time. The other half is that asynchronous component. Now, because of the way that my schedule has worked out with the 2 sections I'm teaching, essentially what this means is I'm able to provide each of those halves, so the total 3 hours of lecture, via a Zoom live stream, which is what we're doing now. So that's why originally I just suggested just come Tuesday and Thursday morning to the live stream, because then you get all the material you need for the week. You can ask questions if you have any, and I'm here to answer them. And you just don't have to basically look for other time in your schedule to fit the video in later. Now, if you can't do that, which is understandable because you might have a conflict, that's the purpose of the recording. So say that you come every Thursday and you attend at 8 a.m. So now you're getting half of what you need for the week. The other half, which will be posted on Tuesday morning, you just need to make sure you watch or review that before the Thursday lecture of the following week. That way you don't get behind in the material. All right, does that make sense? Any questions about that? Okay, sweet. All right. Okay, so that's how the lecture is going to work. Today is lecture 1, Tuesday will be lecture 2, and then we'll just progress from there. I'm also available for office hours. Oh, yeah, it really just comes down. So Tyara, sorry about that. It really just comes down to preference. So if you would prefer to just attend the live lectures where I'm going through the material kind of like with you as much as I can right now, then I would attend both. The other reason that I would suggest attending both is just because, again, you know when you're going to get the material, you can just attend the class and you just get it done, essentially. But for some students, it might be that they don't want to attend the lectures at all and they just watch the videos. I've had students that have done this in the past too, and they've been equally successful. So let's say, because this is a good segue, let's say that you prefer to just watch the videos, which again is fine. Like I'm not there's no right or wrong way. It's all learning style. Some students don't want to listen to me talk at all and they just want to read the textbook. That's also perfectly fine. Like whatever works for you, works for you. So let's say that you want to take a different approach where you're not attending the live lectures and instead you're going through the material on your own. If you have questions for me, I am available on Monday and Tuesday from 1 to 2:30 p.m. in my office hour. So the office hours are a time that I dedicate to taking questions about the course material. This semester, I'm teaching 2 courses, Stat 151 and Stat 324. So during the office hour, there is, it can happen that you might be in line and the person in front of you might not be a Stat 151 student, but really that doesn't make a difference because during office hour, I just take students in one at a time. So when you enter the office hour room, and you can see that the link is given here in the course outline, you'll just be put on a waiting list and then I'll admit you as the spots become free. Now, typically you don't have to wait very long. In my experience, you usually get in right away, but occasionally, like say in the office hours leading up to the midterm or the office hours leading up to an assignment being due, it gets a little busier. But that time is time that I have dedicated to taking student questions. Now, if the office hour times don't work for you and you still have questions, you're free to email me. My email is right here. And I like to try and stay on top of my emails, so I tend to respond as quickly as I can to these things. If the question is something that is fairly redundant and is answered in the course outline, you might not get a response as quickly or at all. But for the most part, as long as they're material-based questions, I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So these are the 2 main options for contacting me. And through email, you can also schedule appointments with me if you would like to discuss something outside of office hours related to the course material, whatever that might be. We also offer a learning center or like a tutoring, kind of like an in-house one-on-one tutoring service, I guess you could call it. It's not really tutoring, but it's like like an office hour that occurs throughout the day, which is monitored by different professors in the department. So once that information is available, I'll post that for you as well. The point being that there's a lot of external resources that you can use to work through the material throughout the semester. All right, so that's office hours, lecture time, again, all being done through Zoom. Yeah, exactly. So Dylan, that's exactly correct. So like technically, let's see, which outline do I have up right now? This is ASO3. So right now, this lecture would technically be the asynchronous component for ASO3. No, that's not, yeah, that's correct, right? Because ASO3 is Tuesday. So right now, this would be the online synchronous component for ASO1, and Tuesday would be the asynchronous component for ASO1. But what you're saying is the right idea. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, basically the point is every week there's 2 lectures. They will be recorded on Tuesday and Thursday at 8 a.m. live. If you can attend both, then you get all the material you need for the week. If you can't attend, then the video of the lecture will be posted afterward for you to review when you can. But ideally, like say that you watch the lecture 2 video online, you just want to make sure you get that before lecture 3, essentially. Okay, so in the course outline, all the details regarding the course are given, right? Course outline, makes sense. This, of course, is Stat 151. The purpose of Stat 151 is to give a general introduction to statistics, the types of, for lack of a better term, things we can do with statistics, and essentially like the point of this course really is to build numerical sense and develop a routine for making decisions based off of information. So to make more informed decisions based off of the data that you have in front of you. Now, in doing that, we're going to cover a variety of different topics, but we'll get to that later. Okay, so the course has 5 different components that contribute to your grade. So those 5 components are given on page 2 in the evaluation table. So there is a term examination, AKA this is the midterm. Okay, and that's worth 20% of your mark. And the midterm is going to be held during the first week of November, which is the week before the reading week. Now, this is the only time that your scheduled time is going to actually, well, for the midterm and the final, sorry, those are the only 2 times that your scheduled time is actually going to matter. So during this week on November 2nd, ASO3 is going to write their midterm. And then on the Thursday, ASO1 students will write their midterm. Okay, that's how it's going to be sectioned out. And the reason for this is because if there is a conflict, I can't ask someone that has a Thursday time slot to write on Tuesday. So this is the only time where we're really going to have to strictly follow what is given in your particular schedule. Now, I'll send lots of reminders about this. There will be updates as we get closer to the date. All of the details about the test will be made clear to you once we get closer to. But just keep in mind, like if you're in ASO3, you're writing on Tuesday. If you're in ASO1, you're writing on Thursday. Well, specifically, if you're in ASO3, you write Tuesday, November 2nd. And if you're in ASO1, you write Thursday, November 4th. And that's the midterm. And that's 20% of your mark. And the material for the midterm will be determined based off of where we are essentially the week before the test. So this is something that we need to work up towards, and more details will become, and the details of the test will become clear as we get to that date. For the final exam, actually, I think the final exam for both sections is held at the same time. So they are both Thursday, December 16th at 9. So we don't actually need to worry about that. But again, there will be lots of reminders and such about when the final exam is going to be held. And the format for the final will be the same as the format for the term exam. So the midterm or the term exam is 20%. The final exam is 35%. So that's 55%. The final is cumulative, Ariel, but it usually uses more material post midterm. So I'll explain that more as we get closer to it, but it is technically cumulative, but I tend to ask more questions from after the midterm. Okay, the next aspect is are the homework assignments. How many questions are, I don't know. It changes every year. I think last year I did 5 questions, but they had small parts to them. So maybe there were like 20 questions total if you include all the subparts. I don't know. It just depends. Sorry, any other questions? Do we have to write the midterm from 8 to 9:30 or can we write it? We're going to write it during the scheduled time. Because of the way that the system works, we're just going to use the lecture time to write the midterm. It's not like open the same way the lab quizzes are, for example. Any other questions? Yes, we are. And I will get to that in a little bit. And I'll give some resources for that as well. Any other questions? No. So the way that I've run the exams is essentially you'll be sent the question sheet through CrowdMark when the exam opens. And then if you need to ask me questions or need clarification, I'll be available on Zoom and you can just log in and out to ask the questions, but you're not expected to be in a room at the time you're rating. At least not right now. If something changes policy-wise, then it could be the case, but that's not the plan as of this moment. Any other questions? Okay. Okay, so the next component of your grading scheme or of the grading scheme are the homework assignments. So we have 6 assignments. I'll come back to the due dates in a little bit, but the first due date is actually not until near the end of September, early October. So we still have quite a bit of time before the first one is due. The assignments take question from lecture and lab. So basically the assignment is split into 2 parts. You have part A, which is the lecture part, and part B, which is the lab part. And you submit all of them together in one package. And all of that will be done via CrowdMark. And I'll go over how that works via video and a little bit of a discussion next class. But for now, I just want to get through the outline and start the material. Then I'll get the assignment posted and we'll move on to that next aspect. But basically, you need to attend both the lectures and the lab in order to complete the assignment. Okay, so it's one package that includes questions from both lecture and lab, which means that you need to be familiar with the lab software in order to finish the assignment questions. But all of it gets submitted together at one time via CrowdMark, and then it gets graded by a TA and the marks will get returned to you, et cetera, et cetera. R is the software that we're using in the lab. So you should have seen an email from your lab instructor or a generic email from the lab coordinator, effectively asking you to install R on your machine, and then R Commander, which is the second part of it. And that's the software you're using for the lab. If you haven't done this yet, I sent out an email yesterday. So if you check the course website, I'll get to that in a second. If you check the course website, there's times where you can go in and get help with installing that. So there's help sessions available for installation. I'll show you those times momentarily. Any other questions about the assignments? In hindsight, when you asked what is R, maybe I just should have said a letter, but probably would have been kind of a dick answer, right? So maybe I should have, probably better I didn't. Does it need to be installed or can we just, oh yeah, you can use it through my apps. Yep, that's fine. Good point. Yeah, you don't have to install it. You can use it online. Yeah. Okay, so any other questions? The midterm and the final exam will be open book. They have to be because of the structure in which we're conducting them. Like there's no way to police it. The lab quizzes and the lab exam would also technically have to be open book for the same reason. Okay. Okay, so we talked about the term exam, the midterm, term exam, same thing. We talked about the final exam. We talked about the assignments. And then on Tuesday, I'm also going to go through the assignments again. So after we start some material, I'm going to post the assignments for you to review. And then I'm going to go through the structure of it. I'm going to post some resources for CrowdMark, this kind of thing. The last 2 components are the lab evaluation specific components. So lab quizzes and lab final. So there are 5 lab quizzes, I believe, but I'll review this momentarily in the semester. Those lab quizzes are open for a 24-hour period starting on Monday evening and finishing on Tuesday evening. The only exception is the week of Thanksgiving where it starts on Tuesday and finishes on Wednesday. So you have 24 hours to get your solutions in for the lab quizzes. And the lab quizzes ask questions that are specific to the lab part of the course. So they're questions that would be closely related to the assignment part B's and to the demo or practice problems that were posted for the lab. There's also a lab final exam, which you can essentially just think of as like a big lab quiz. And this is going to be run in the same way as the quizzes, except that it takes place in the very last week of the semester. I'll review the dates with you momentarily, and you just have to answer more questions. So I think that the time limit for the lab final is 1.5 hours, whereas the time limit for the quizzes is 1 hour, something like this. Again, all those questions would have to be open book based off of the way they're run. But the lab quiz and the lab final are questions specifically related to using the software, and they are questions that will require you to use the software. Whereas the midterm and the final, those ask questions that are not going to require you to use any technology outside of a calculator. So they're specific to the lecture style. So you can think of, once you see the assignment structure, you have a part A and a part B. The part A is the lecture part, the part B is the lab part. You can think of the midterm and the final as being associated with the part A, and you can think of the lab quizzes and the lab final as being associated with the part B. Okay, so we combine everything on the assignments, but then we have separate tests for lecture and lab components. Okay. So in the course outline, we also have our grade pointing scheme. Is any of our classes, including the labs, in person or everything online? All of the lectures are online. There are a few lab sections that are being run as a hybrid. So that would be made specific to you in your particular schedule. So you have to check which lab you're in. I think there's only 3 labs that are running hybrid. And again, it just depends on what you registered for. But even with the hybrid model, it's at the instructor's discretion how that hybrid class is going to run. So it really just depends on which section you're in and how your particular lab instructor is running it, if it is a hybrid. But for the most part, it's pretty much all online. Okay. Now, this is an important point, and sometimes this gets a little lost, but I want to make this clear right now. So if you need Stat 151 to get into another class, so say, for example, you're a psychology student, psychology typically requires Stat 252. To get into Stat 252, you have to pass Stat 151. But it's not as simple as just passing versus failing. You need to get, if you want to use this as credit to get into the next class. So if you want to basically say, like, I have the correct prerequisite, you need to get at least a C- in Stat 151. So we don't recognize a grade below C- as sufficient for moving on to the next level. Now, if you just need to pass, so for example, say that you this is the only, mathematics style of course that you have to take in your university career, and you just need to pass it so that you can say, I have it, and then move on to whatever it is you're studying, then you have to get at least a D. Okay. So the D is pass in the most general sense, like, okay, I've passed the class, I have the credit. But if you need to use the credit to move on to another class, you need to get at least a C-. Okay, so that would be in the situation if you want to take Stat 252, or even if you wanted to take Stat 265, I believe, you need to get at least a C- in Stat 151. And there might be other courses that have the same requirement, but those are the 2 that I'm most familiar with. So those are the examples that I'm using. So there's a difference between just passing and being able to use it to get to the next level. So that's something that you want to keep in mind. Now, with that being said, to get a C- in the class, you have to get at least 40% on the final exam. So if you write the final exam and your score is less, if you write the final exam and your score is less than 40%, the best that you can do in the course is then a D+. Okay, so there's some strings attached to that score of a C minus. And basically what those strings are is a demonstration that you actually understand, in this case, at least 40% of the material, which isn't really a huge ask in my opinion, but that's the way that it works. Okay, so there's a difference between general, like I passed the class and I have the credit, and being able to use it as a prereq to get to the next level. Okay. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Okay, so after that, there's just some details about class activities, the recordings. These are all things that I went over before, so I'm not going to go over these again. We talked about the homework assignments, so there's some more detail in here about the composition of the assignment, but I'll get those posted after lecture before the weekend, and then you'll be able to see an example of it, and I'll post some videos to how the CrowdMark works as well. But for the most part, it's very straightforward. CrowdMark is basically just a software that allows you to upload a picture that you take on your phone. So it tends to be pretty user friendly, and for the most part, students are they pick it up pretty quick. But we'll be there to help you before the first assignment, which again is quite a ways away. Talked about the lab component, and again for the labs, you're gonna see, or you're going to have a discussion about the composition of the labs in your actual lab session. So these are all things that the instructors are going to go over with you. Also, I should mention on my YouTube channel, if you go back to near the beginning of it, I actually have videos posted from the Stat 151 labs from last semester. Those videos will be somewhat outdated because the demo questions have changed, but if you like my teaching style and you like the videos, those resources are also available to you if you want to use them external to your own labs. Just FYI, I'm not saying that they're better or anything, just it's there, that's all. Okay, so here's the lab exam date, but I'll go through that again momentarily. Okay, I need to go over the academic integrity statement. Okay, so basically, what is academic integrity? It basically means that you are, well, the exact definition is not given here. So MacEwan University's academic integrity policy promotes honesty, fairness, respect, trust, and responsibility in all academic work. The policy defines academic misconduct as the following. Okay, so academic misconduct is participating in acts by which a person gains or attempts to gain an unfair academic advantage, thereby compromising the integrity of the academic process. So examples of this would be cheating, plagiarism, improper collaboration, contract cheating, which is a severe misconduct. Okay, so contract cheating is essentially using any paid service to gain an advantage during, say, like a test, or during a test would be one of the major examples. So in the past, students have tried to use Chegg, which is like an online tutoring software sort of idea. And they've used this like during tests to try and get answers to the test while they're writing it. This would be considered a severe misconduct, which has to be reported and has to go to adjudication. And typically the process ends up with a grade reduction and a transcript notation. So there are consequences to taking part in these kinds of activities. Okay, so obviously just don't do it. Other examples include fabrication, falsification, helping or attempting to help another student commit misconduct. So you're guilty by association in that sense. Trying to obtain an unfair advantage in any way, and repeatedly submitting the same assignment for credit or the same test, that kind of idea. All right, so all of you, when you take your test, you'll be asked to basically sign a statement saying that you agree to the consequences of taking part in these activities, and therefore if you are caught and you're proven to have committed an academic misconduct, you accept the penalties that are associated with those. And you should also just, if you're unclear, review the policies that are given on the academic portion of the course website, and there's links to that given in the course outline. Okay, so I'll go over a few other key dates momentarily with regards to signing up for the course and withdrawing from the course. We talked about final exams, and we'll talk about the final exam more as we go through this semester. There is an appeal process if you would like to appeal a grade, but I don't think that that would apply in this particular class because our final exams are not worth more than 40% of the mark, but you would have to review the guidelines for appeals in order to determine if that is true. Okay, some policies that I have written down. Okay, essentially, like just to summarize, it probably would. Yeah, I can't answer that question for sure. I don't know exactly the language that's used, but I would assume that that would be the case. So if you sign like a statement saying that you're not going to cheat this kind of idea, and you're caught cheating, then you probably wouldn't be able to appeal the mark. But if it's not, if it's under the circumstance where you're appealing, you wrote the test honestly, and you think that it wasn't graded fairly, like that's a different situation. But in these situations, and this is the point I was going to make here under the instructor policy, if you're not sure about a grade, if you're not sure about anything related to the course, the first step is just to email me and ask for clarification. And most of the time we can sort it out that way. And if there's going to be a situation, say, where you can't write the term test at the scheduled time for whatever reason, or you're going to be late submitting an assignment for some reason, whatever it may be, just email me and let me know what's going on, and we can usually work it out between us. So that's not something that really needs to escalate. If it has to escalate, it has to escalate. I'm not saying that you shouldn't take advantage of what's given to you, or you shouldn't use the resources that are available to you. But most of the time we can work these things out just via email, and just a discussion on the situation at hand. It's a tough scenario. Like, we can talk about it again. It's really case by case. So if you email me and let me know the situation, then we can work it out from there. But for the midterm and the final, like, you have the dates, so you know when that's occurring. So if you should be, hopefully you can schedule your shift around that. But if that isn't the case, again, just email me and let me know what's going on, and we'll work it out to get everything done. Okay. So we talked about how the lectures are going to work, the synchronous and asynchronous components. There's nothing else in here. Everything else in here, I think you can just review on your own time. The tests, again, they're open book. So, I mean, if you want to use your phone to look at the material, I really don't have an issue with that. But don't use your phone to like phone a friend and ask them answers of the test, right? That's the idea. Oh, textbook. Yes. I skipped that. Thank you. All right. Textbooks. So under required material, I listed the name of the textbook that the coursework is based off of, but it's not actually required. So my suggestion in terms of the textbook is to just see how you're finding the lectures in the first few weeks of the class. So I'm going to give you lots of examples, a lot of explanation about the material. I'm going to go through what you need to complete the assignments with you. And if you find after a few weeks, say, that you want more practice or you want a different explanation via, say, written word, then I would suggest getting the textbook. But in the past, I've never made the textbook for this class required. Most years, I don't think the majority of students buy the textbook, though I can't say for sure because I don't keep a tally of that sort of thing. But most years, the students use the course notes, and they do very well without needing the textbook. So even though it's listed under required, I would suggest that you use this as an additional resource only if you feel the need to get it. Just extra practice. So Adina, yeah, it's not, there's nothing that would be written on the tests or the assignments that you would need the textbook to do. Everything is done by us in-house, so all the questions are kind of like homemade, if you will, in that sense. So it's really just an additional resource for you to use to aid your studying, in my opinion. Okay. Oh, actually here too, it says this is not true. So I'll have to take this out. I don't use the modules. I just use the course notes. So I need to update that. And the lab manual for the class is also written by the lab instructor. So that's a free resource that's on the lab website. So the only thing that wouldn't be free on this list is technically the textbook. But again, nothing is actually required. The only thing that you really need to do is just make sure you're keeping up with the lecture material and working through the practice problems and the assignments that I post for you. That should be sufficient. But if you feel you need more, that's when I would go to the textbook. Okay. All right. So now let's get into the schedule because that's the last thing I want to do. All right. So on the last 2 pages of the course outline, there's a tentative schedule of events. Okay. So we're not going to follow. I'm going to try and follow this as best I can. There's going to be weeks where we get a little bit behind. There's going to be weeks where we're a little bit ahead. I mean, for example, I'm probably going to be a little bit behind after today's lecture because I've spent 42 minutes talking about the course outline. So we'll probably still be doing lecture 1 next week, but it's a short lecture. So we'll probably catch up and then maybe even push ahead a little bit after that. All right. So tentatively, essentially each week, we're going to do a different lecture set. So week 1, lecture set 1, week 2, lecture set 2, week 3, lecture set 3, etc. And then there's a few cases where it might split across weeks, but for the most part, that's the process or the schedule that we're going to follow. Next Friday, so that's September 17th, is the last day to add or drop classes with no adjustment to tuition. Okay, so that would be the drop date, at the earliest drop date where you can refund your tuition completely, as I understand the date. And it's also the last day where you can add a course to your calendar. So if you want to switch sections, for example, this would be the last day that you could do that. Okay, so week 4, you can see on week 4, we have our first assignment due and our first lab quiz. So the 27th is the Monday, so assignment 1 is due on Tuesday, which would be September 28th. And then the lab quiz opens. Okay, so I was wrong about this. The lab quiz is open on the Wednesday and they are due on the Thursday. So that's how this is working in week 4. So you can see that the assignment and the quizzes come together in kind of a set. So our first assignment quiz combo is due in the 4th week of the class. So that's the last week of September and then the first day of October. No, I'm going to do material today. I'm just not going to probably finish the material today. And then our next set is due week 6. So you can see that there is a 2-week gap between the assignment and the lecture quiz, and we're trying to maintain this 2-week gap throughout the semester. Okay, so how would you recommend we take notes? Well, there's a lot of different ways that you could do this. So depending on what you have available to you. Okay, so this would be one example of something you can do. I post the lecture notes, like the incomplete lecture notes. I don't know why I quoted that. They are incomplete lecture notes. I post incomplete lecture notes on the course website. So one thing you could do is just have the notes in front of you and then write the parts that I am completing for you. You could make notes, say, on a piece of paper and just reference the slide number and the topic and say, okay, this is the note that he made about this particular item in the lecture set. Another thing I've seen students do is print out the lecture notes and fill them in as we go. So basically, more or less copy what I have put on the lecture set and kind of place them in the same spots. I've also seen students use like a tablet and they have the PDF on the tablet and they fill it in with a stencil, this kind of idea. I'm going to post everything I write down. I'm going to post the recordings. So your process for taking notes, I think, is something you need to develop on your own, and find a method that works for you. So those are what I gave. There were 3 examples of what you could do, but it might be the case that none of those you like and you find another way of doing it, which is perfectly fine. I think that note taking is kind of a personal skill or preference, if you will. Yeah, a graphing calculator is more than enough, Kira. You only need, in this class, the only calculator you would need is one that's basically capable of doing a square root. That would be the highest function that would be required. So a basic scientific calculator would work fine as well, but the graphing one is more than enough. Yeah. Sorry, Alyssa. Alyssa, did that answer your question? I know it's kind of a vague answer, but okay, no worries. Okay, yeah, so we have assignment, lab quiz due every 2 weeks. So the second assignment, week 6, is actually due on the Wednesday. That's because of Thanksgiving. And then that lab quiz opens on the Thursday and is due on the Friday, again, because of Thanksgiving. So typically we do a Tuesday, Thursday due date for assignment and quiz, but week 6, the Thanksgiving week, we do a Wednesday, Friday because of Thanksgiving. Okay, and then week 9, so the week before the reading break, that's our midterm week. Again, I'll post lots of reminders about this as we get closer to it. And then the week after the reading week, we have assignment 4, lab quiz 4 due. 2 weeks, then we have assignment 5, lab quiz 5. And then in the last week of the course, we have assignment 6 and the lab final exam. Okay, so this is the schedule of due dates for the assignments and the quizzes. For the most part, always 2 weeks apart, with the exception of when the midterm is held, then we have a 3-week break. And then the last week, the assignment is 1 week apart. But assignment 6 is a shorter assignment than the rest. Okay, and then we have our schedule of events that we're going to try and stick to. Oh, and if you are using the textbook, the sections of the textbook that correspond to the material is given in the tentative outline as well. Yep, that's correct. Yeah, so the assignments are the assignment is both lecture, lab quiz and final is just lab, midterm final is just lecture, essentially. Oh, I missed something here. Is it Tuesday, Wednesday, or Wednesday, Thursday? It's Tuesday, Thursday in general. The lab quiz is open on Wednesday night. So you have 24 hours to submit your lab quiz answers, and you have from Wednesday until Thursday night. So it's due on the Thursday. So it's Tuesday, Thursday due dates, assignment, lab quiz. Yeah, so I can show, I guess I'll demonstrate how to format the answer based off of the way that I solve the problems in the lecture set. With answering the kind of questions that we're going to be working with, there is very much a process that's involved with working through the different steps. Like mathematics or mathematical answers tend to be fairly linear in that it starts with a general statement and works its way down to the conclusion. So the formatting of the questions will kind of just follow that style of notation, but I'll work through that with you. In terms of getting full marks, I mean, a lot of the time it's, did you arrive at the right conclusion and did you show your work is more or less what is required. But I'll go through that with you as well as we work through the materials. Okay, 8:50. Does anyone have any other questions about the outline? I've 50, it's the longest outline discussion ever. Yeah, I'll do it next time. I'll post some examples and I'll go over it next time. Yeah. The lab software I'm not going to do in lecture. That's lab specific. Oh, the website. I forgot to do the website. Okay, just gonna do this. Why did you put extra emphasis on a seat? Because there's a difference in what they mean. So again, well, it's C minus versus D plus, but the C minus, if you get a C minus in the class, that means that you can essentially use it as a requisite to progress to the next level. And if you get a D plus, that means that you passed the class, but you can't use it as a prereq to get to the next stage. Okay, the one other thing I wanted to go over was the course outline. Sorry, 1 second here. I'm just going to pull that up. All right. So share screen again. Okay, so the course website is via Blackboard. So there's a few different ways to get to Blackboard. You can use the URL, which is just learn.mcewen.ca, or you can actually access it through the My McEwen page. So if you log in to the website, okay, you can see Blackboard Learn is listed here, and that'll both learn.mcewen.ca and this link will get you to the site. And you can see here that I have to continually log in. Uh-oh. I'm gonna get locked out. Okay, I clearly have forgotten my password here. There we go. Okay, so if you log into Blackboard, you should see something that looks like this, like a My Courses list. It might not look exactly like mine because of the role, but it should be very similar. And then you'll see here a list of different course names. You probably won't see the ones that are not available, but you will see, for example, this merged ASO1, ASO3 merged course. You'll probably see the lab merged course as well. So this merged course is going to be the link to our particular course, okay, which is shown here. And on this page, the most important side link is course content. So you can see in the course content folder, there's links, a link to the lecture, a link to office hours. The course outlines are in the course outline folder. All the lecture sets. Okay, cool. Yeah, but you don't, okay, so the unavailable ones you don't need, you just need this merged one that is available. Right, so in the course content folder, everything you need for the lecture is essentially contained in there, right? So you have your links to the office hours and the lecture course outline. Here's the lecture sets. So you can see all of the lecture sets for the class have been posted already. So yeah, well, no, I'll send you a separate link for those. They're on the YouTube channel. I'll post a link for that, actually. That's a good idea. Thanks. Yeah, so all the lecture sets are in here. We're going to start with lecture set 1 momentarily, and then we'll just continue to work through the rest of the lecture sets throughout the semester. Yeah, these are the incomplete notes. I'll post the completed ones underneath. So once I finish it, I'll post it with a title that's like date started and date completed kind of idea. The formula sheet for the course is also given in the outline, so you can use this on the assignments if you would like. And for the midterm and the final, you can also use the same formula sheet. There are some practice problems at the end of the lecture set, and then I'll post a separate set of practice problems specific to the midterm and the final. So depending on where we are in the course and what's going to be on the midterm, I'll give out the practice problems based off of that material. The practice problems for the midterm and the final will be put into the midterm and the final exam folders once we get closer to the dates. And all of the assignments, questions, and the CrowdMark links will be put into the assignment folder. And I'm going to start uploading the first assignment before the weekend, and I'll send out an announcement about that, and I'll go over that and the CrowdMark stuff on Tuesday. Okay, so this is where everything you're going to need is going to be located throughout the semester. Any questions? All right, so here we go. Lecture set number 1. I'll chat. Okay, so lecture set 1. It's a pretty short lecture set, so probably won't finish it today because there's only 20 minutes left, but we'll continue with it in lecture 2, which is on Tuesday, and then we'll move into lecture set 2 once we're done with the first one. So the purpose of this lecture set is really just to give you an introduction to what statistics is in the broadest sense, and then discuss some of the ways that we can differentiate between types of statistics, and then mainly a set of key definitions that we're going to use throughout the course. Okay, so what is statistics? Right? This is a pretty logical question to start off an introductory statistics course with. The answer is it kind of depends, but one of the quotes that I like to use is given here on page 3, and it's written, "It's a body of methods for making wise decisions in the face of uncertainty." Okay. Now, the reason that I like this quote is because, going back to one of the points I made earlier, one of the main purposes of this course is to make informed decisions, right? So to use the data that you have in front of you to make a decision based off of what that data is telling you. So this quote, I think, is sort of a more epic way of describing that goal. Okay, so the idea here, again, is to take the information that you have and to let the information guide you, not to necessarily misinterpret the information or look at it in a, to let the information speak for itself, essentially, and then you make a decision based off of that. All right, more formally, we can define statistics in 2 different ways. So statistics can just be raw value, for example. So facts or data, they can be numerical. They could also be non-numerical. They could be organized or summarized information. In general, they can just be like raw value. And we'll look at some examples of those momentarily. Statistics is also, or can also be thought of as a science. Well, it is a science. And in that sense, it's the science of organizing and summarizing information. So these 2 general definitions, or I guess more specific definitions given the quote that was shown before, actually set the foundation for how the course is broken up. So this course is all about introducing you to statistics. And the first half of the course really corresponds to the first definition. So what we're going to start off by doing is looking at data or looking at statistics as raw information and looking at it through charts and visualizations and learning how to make sense of what we are actually looking at in those different aspects. And then the second half of the course is the part devoted to the science of organizing and summarizing information. So in the second half of the course, we'll look at techniques that will actually allow us to make decisions about a particular question. So maybe a better way to say that is in the second half, we'll learn how to answer questions using data. Okay, so we're going to split the course based off of these two general definitions. Okay, in terms of the first definition, which is the raw data or the information, here are some examples of what that could mean. And there's tons of different examples of this that can be found on a daily basis via news outlets, or, you know, obviously if you're following the pandemic numbers, like those would all be considered raw statistics on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so here's just some general ones that I, pulled off the internet. So as of January 2021, the internet had an estimated 4.6 billion users, right? This is a count. 4.66 billion people are estimated to use the internet. This is a statistic. It's a count of how many people are using the internet. Kim Kardashian's net worth is $1.2 million. Again, this is a fact or a value. It's a numerical value that assigns monetary value, I guess, to Kim Kardashian. The average annual salary for a family physician in Canada is 242,526 Canadian dollars. On August 18th, the closing price of one share of Apple stock was $146.36 American. Connor McDavid has 195 goals in 407 NHL games. Okay, so these are all just examples of raw data or facts, and they can be considered statistics. This would be the first definition. So just information that's presented to you that summarizes some event, right? So we have, for example, how much Kim Kardashian has accumulated in her career, how many people use the internet, how many goals McDavid has scored in the NHL. Which I should say, by the way, is a tailored example. I'm not an Oilers fan. I was born in Toronto, so I unfortunately have the privilege of cheering for the Leafs, but I think you guys can feel my pain in some sense. All right. As statisticians, our interests typically lie in calculating, interpreting, and using these values, okay? And we can describe our goal based off of these values as being either descriptive or inferential. So descriptive versus inferential. What does this mean? Nice. Okay. So descriptive statistics, I guess I'm not alone. That's sweet. Trying to think of what Matthew's nickname is. Something like some weird name. Thank you. Oilers in 6. Like if they met in the final, you mean? I can't get out of the first round. I know. I don't want to talk about the Leafs in the first round. This year's the year. Okay, so we have two major types of decisions of statistics: the descriptive statistics and the inferential statistics. Again, descriptive statistics are effectively they're a term that describes the first definition of statistics. So our descriptive statistics are these raw values or descriptive measures like charts and things like this. So this is what we're going to study in lecture set 2, are the descriptive statistics. Inferential statistics are what we're going to study in the second half of the course. Now, the purpose of inferential statistics is to make decisions and to answer questions. So these are actually methods or techniques that we use when we have data that has been presented to us and we want to say something about what that data is telling us. Now, when we use inferential statistics, the purpose is to take what we have collected, which we typically refer to as a sample, and use that sample to make a statement about a larger population. So the way that we phrase or the way that we define our problems in this particular class as it relates to inferential statistics is to say we have some population that's of interest to us. And this population can really be anything. Like it could be, you know, like all of the people in Alberta, or it could be all of the people in Canada, or it could be all of the cats in Edmonton. Like these are all valid populations that you might be interested in talking about. Now, it should be noted that obviously as the population becomes larger and more dynamic, the problem becomes harder as well. Like theoretically, it would be easier to make a statement about all Albertans compared to all Canadians. Theoretically, not necessarily true in practice, but theoretically. In either case, it's unlikely we're going to be able to speak to every single person. So we use what is called a sample to make a statement about the larger population. And that's the purpose of inferential statistics. Okay, so basically to try and make a statement about a larger population of interest based off of what we have actually collected. Now, I like to illustrate this idea through a very simple graph. Okay, so this is my population versus sample graph. So consider this rectangle. Okay. This rectangle will represent some population that is of interest to us. Okay. Now, within this population, we want to, or we are going to collect a sample. So we can't speak to every single unit or observation or element that exists within the population. Okay, so that's what we call an item that's a member of the population of interest. We call it an element or a unit or an observation. And again, this can be anything. So if your population is all people in Alberta, then an element of that population would be one person that lives in Alberta, for example. So if this rectangle is our population, inside this rectangle, there exists some number of elements or units. They're population members. Now, the sample is just a subset of the population. So what does that mean? It means if you were to consider, for example, this circle here, this could be one sample from the population. So you can see that the circle exists inside of the rectangle. So the sample exists inside the population. But if we were to actually pull this circle out, that would only give us a small portion of the population at large, which is typically what we're dealing with when we're performing inferential statistics. Okay, so we're going to use what's contained within the sample to make a statement about the population. But the sample is simply just a smaller part of the population that we can actually get information from. Now, this sample is just one visual example of what the sample could be. If you were to collect a sample again, and you can technically you can sample as many times as you want from the same population. It's possible that your second sample might be over here. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just represents the fact that you're not always pulling the same information each time you sample. If you were to do it again, you might have a third sample that's over here. That word is sample. Okay, and hopefully you can see kind of the general idea of what I'm trying to get at here. The sample doesn't have to be in the exact same spot. It can be from different parts of the population, but it's always something that exists within or contains a subset of the population. If you were to do this again, it's also possible that you get overlap, right? So we might observe a situation where, say, our fourth sample is here, and now we're getting a little bit of what would have been in sample 2 in sample 4, and that's perfectly fine as well. The samples are just random parts of the population. That's the point. And in this class, once we get to the inferential aspect, we are going to be using a sample of information to make a statement about the larger population. So we're going to be using one of these circles to make a statement about the rectangle, if you will. Any questions about that concept? All right, so far we have talked about the following: general definitions of statistics and the two types of statistics, descriptive versus inferential. To distinguish between descriptive and inferential statistics, we're effectively just distinguishing between the goal of the study. And we're going to come back to talk about that momentarily. Now, the other way that we can define a particular study is as an observational study versus what is called a designed experiment. So these particular definitions are related to how the data is collected. So we have this idea of a population of interest to us, which is that rectangle. And then we have the idea of a sample that exists within that population, which were represented by those circles on the previous diagram. The way that we collect the sample can be through either the observational study or the designed experiment. So we can think of these two definitions as defining where the data comes from. Now, distinguishing between the observational study and the designed experiment is actually pretty straightforward. So with the observational study, we're basically just observing the elements in the sample and making notes about how they behave. So in that definition, we're not applying any kind of constraint or treatment. We're not manufacturing data. That's the big difference. The data exists naturally within the population, and we are simply observing the data or the units and recording information based off of how they kind of act on a day-to-day or hour-to-hour basis. Okay, so an example of this might be something like maybe you're studying a wildlife species and you want to learn how the wildlife species behaves in their particular environment. So in this case, you would go to the particular environment that you are interested in. I don't know, like say like somewhere in Africa, and you want to study the lions, for example, and you would observe from a distance the way the lions behave, and you would make notes about their behavior. Okay, so this is an observational study. You're not doing anything to change the behavior. You're simply observing how the observation behaves in its particular environment. In the designed experiment, you are applying a pressure to the unit to create data. Okay, so the most relevant example of this really would be vaccination testing, right? So you have people that are admitting a particular condition, and you give them a vaccine to test how they respond to the vaccine. So in this case, you're creating an output, which might be recovery or not recover, based off of the treatment that's being applied, which is the vaccine. So the designed experiment creates a result based off of the condition that you are applying to the units. Okay, so differentiating between the observational study, okay, no worries, I'll post the video after. So the difference between the observational study and the designed experiment is simply that in the observational study, the data exists naturally and you are only observing it. Whereas in the designed experiment, you're applying a pressure to create a response. Okay. Now, when we want to make a determination about the effect of a particular treatment, that's when a designed experiment would be most useful. Observational studies can't necessarily reveal a direct link between this observed constraint and the response. Okay, they can reveal association. So we observed that, you know, like once the sun started to set, the lions woke up or something like this. And then we can say things like, it seems like they're more active at night, but we can't say this exact pressure led to this exact result. Whereas in the designed experiment, because these are typically situations where you have a controlled environment, you can make more specific statements linking the treatment of interest to the outcome. All right, so let's use this example here. Sorry, let me just check what's. Okay, so let's use this example here to highlight the differences between the two. So in this example, we want to classify the study as being an observational study or a designed experiment. So in example 1, we have in the article, One's Sex, Sleep, and Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder, the authors use a questionnaire of men and women with and without PTSD to collect data on their sleep habits. They report that women have a higher lifetime prevalence of PTSD, as well as a greater risk of developing PTSD following trauma exposure. Okay, so the key here is the authors use a questionnaire of men and women with and without PTSD to collect data. So they're not applying any pressure to the observations. They're just asking questions about their experience with and without PTSD and how it relates to their sleep habits. So this would be an example of an observational study. Okay, so we're not applying any particular constraint to generate data. We're simply taking a collection of people that have a particular, well, in this case, do or do not have PTSD, and we're just asking them questions about how they sleep. In example 2, we have in the paper, cardiac resynchronization therapy with or without an implantable defibrillator in advanced chronic heart failure. The authors report the results of a study where 1,520 patients were randomly assigned in a 1-to-2 ratio to receive optimal pharmacologic therapy alone or in combination with either a pacemaker or a pacemaker defibrillator combination. All right, so in the second example, the key part here is that patients were randomly assigned to a particular treatment. Okay, so a portion of these patients received only the optimal pharmacologic therapy. A portion of these patients received the same therapy with a pacemaker, and a portion of these patients received the same therapy with a pacemaker defibrillator combination. So a treatment is being applied to the patient. So they're being assigned to a particular treatment, and their response to the treatment is then being monitored. So this is a designed experiment because you are creating a response, which would be, how you react to the treatment by providing that treatment to the patient. Okay, so in that sense, you are kind of creating the response, whereas in the observational study, you are just observing the elements as they naturally occur. Okay. So with that being said, we have, actually, yeah. Okay, so with that being said, I'll stop the lecture here today, and on Tuesday, I'll pick up from where we left off. So lecture 2 is going to be Tuesday at 8 a.m. Everything we did today will be it has been recorded, and I will post it after with timestamps for you to review. And on Tuesday, we'll continue with the lecture set, and I'll talk about assignment 1 and a bit about CrowdMark and submission on CrowdMark. All right, so have a good day. I hope you have a good start to the semester. And if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I will talk to you guys on Tuesday.